you so much, everybody, for joining us today with, I think, what you're going to find to be a very fascinating discussion and probably a little disturbing as well. And that is some of our aging demographics and how this is impacting Minnesotans and how we should be looking toward the future. I'm Chris Sundberg. I'm Executive Director of Elder Voice Family Advocates. We just recently shortened our name to Elder Voice Advocates. The mission for Elder Voice is championing solutions that prevent abuse, neglect, and exploitation while promoting the highest standards of care for all vulnerable adults. I'm also Executive Director of Elder Care IQ, and this is a new online service that provides people with insights into the history of abuse, neglect, and exploitation at nursing homes, assisted living with memory care, and home health care services. Today, we have Ann Bussey, who is going to talk more about this issue. Ann is a retired healthcare leader, currently serves as a thriving in longevity advocate for Minnesota's rural older adult population. She is a community volunteer for many organizations, including the Arrowhead Agency on Aging, as an age-friendly Arrowhead change maker, and with the Duluth area YMCA advocating for healthy aging strategies through its senior member activity programs. Ann is a longtime member of the governor-appointed Minnesota Rural Health Advisory Committee, serving as its chair in 2022. She is currently a member of Fairview Range Community Advancement Committee, as well as its foundation, the Central Mesabi Medical Foundation Board. Ann was recently a fellow in the first cohort of Project REACH, a University of Minnesota policy collaborative to improve rural health outcomes. Her aging advocacy work was informed by an appointment to the Minnesota Board on Aging, and through that appointment, serving as a member of the Healthy Minnesota Partnership, and was also an adjunct faculty with the College of St. Scholastica's Rural Health MBA program, teaching health program evaluation and management, and completed a Master of Arts in Management at the College of St. Scholastica and her undergraduate degree at St. Catherine's University in St. Paul. And she lives in Side Lake, Minnesota. Thank you so much, Ann. Let's ask you, first of all, what got you interested in aging issues?
Well, retirement and the realization that it should not be this hard to age well. I would like to tell a couple of stories that inform my aging journey and connect well with where our policy and strategies should go. It began 8 years ago, walking with a friend, an 80-year-old neighbor in Side Lake, Minnesota, who had written an editorial for the Iron Man paper. We have lost something really important and no one cares. The beginning of this journey that informs us that aging well happens in our local communities. What did my neighbor lose that was so important? A favorite fitness older adult program that had been discontinued in Hibbing, the second time in 5 years. First, a community gym had gone out of business and been torn down. Then the local hospital, Fairview Range, picked up the program, but then had to close it, needing the space for outpatient services. We began to work together, and it took us 15 months to reopen our program. What were our learnings? How difficult it is to sustain an ongoing community activity program for older adults in towns and rural communities. The the power of a group of ladies in town. We had 30 to 40 older women convening monthly at local restaurants, brainstorming and discussing options. Also, the realities of our community with outdated built environments, where often accessibility is gerrymandered in, no gyms with large spaces available during day hours. Discovering too that school-age children and older adults don't mix well, competing for same space during day hours. So we crossed access to school gyms off our list early on. We found that parking areas in many of our sites were not close to access doors, that ramps were built into our old buildings, requiring more steps and zigzagging to get to the event space, elevators that were not located near where we planned to use space too. Our reality was that we needed to work with a YMCA organization located in another range community, considered an unpopular choice for many who grew up on the Iron Range. Another learning for us was the complexity of the fitness benefit that's offered via popular Medicare Advantage plans for financing of these programs, and how it may fall short in our rural areas. Definitely a topic for study and discussion, especially as relates to equity and effectiveness across our state. Attending free of charge is a big deal, since many of our older women live on Social Security as their only source of income. As our journey lagged on, we realized the need for advocacy. So as a newly appointed consumer member to the Rural Health Advisory Committee, I asked for their help, resulting in a letter of advocacy encouraging our communities to work together around common goals for our aging citizens. It worked. We found a nonprofit gym that was sponsored by a YMCA from another community, taking us on as a satellite program. Once we got our program up and running again, there were opportunities along the way. Through a partnership with our Fairview Range Medical Center, a physician visits monthly, exercises with us, and then stays after to talk about aging issues that present in their practices. And that is followed by a very robust question and answer period. We call this Exercise with a Doc. It's very popular. And it's a practical way to meet the preferences of participants, opting for this format over formal evidence-based classes, aging classes offered through the hospital. Seem to be more engaging, more focused, more relevant, fits with their time frames. And the physicians love our program too, surprised at the level of exercise, now strongly recommending the program, referring many of their aging patients. And lastly, what helped us was my background in program evaluation, providing us the opportunity to conduct yearly program evaluations. So the 3 questions that we asked our participants: what are the reasons you attend? How has this fitness program benefited you? And what is your favorite aspect of the program? Our results over the 3 years that we did these evaluations indicate the desired outcomes. And notice the order that these are in: good mental health, social engagement, a sense of well-being and fun, staying in shape, improve chronic disease management and falls prevention. Favorite aspects of the program: being with friends, meeting new friends, instructor engagement, enjoyment of the program, and the Exercise with the Doc program. I would like to note too that we have a good number of participants age 85 years and older. When we have the lapses in our program, which is our history, our oldest people are the most adversely impacted, often not physically able to return. I think our experience can inform our aging agencies to consider ongoing programs. So for example, repeating current activity sessions without breaks in service over a year's time versus offering only a couple sessions per year in our communities. Well, then COVID pandemic hit, March of 2020, our program closed again, and we had new concerns about social isolation, especially with older people. So an opportunity arose with our fitness partner, the Virginia Mesabi YMCA, to mine their senior member registrations for email addresses to set up a virtual communication network. So I changed my status as a community volunteer to become a formal Y volunteer, allowing me the opportunity to research and write daily messages of hope, livability, and well-being for our community senior Y members. A virtual opportunity to combat social isolation for our population during the pandemic, and creating a new healthy aging strategy, connecting virtually through networks. Networks are important to aging. Links to our fitness routines with our favorite instructors started out very robustly, but dropped to zero over time. You know, just validating that people don't really come for the fitness. We know it helps us, but we come to be with our friends and the social aspects of the program. You know, then the email messaging was an opportunity to nurture and promote outdoor winter walking paths, you know, during the pandemic when we were supposed to be socially isolating, encouraging daily maintenance as well as placement of benches and porta potties. Virginia, Chisholm, and Hibbing Park and Rec departments all received age-friendly awards for their commitment to our community seniors during the pandemic. Interesting too that the editor of Hometown Focus, which is a Iron Range community newspaper, asked to be included on the email distribution, choosing an article every week for publication. The expanded messaging was especially helpful when the vaccines became available, enabling a broader communication of vaccine sites, especially for our large population that is not digitally included or digitally literate. We discontinued our daily email in April of 2021 when most of our community older adults had been vaccinated. Again, a big learning for us was less than 50% of our membership had an email associated with their registration. And we knew our database was old, but it did give us a sense of the digital capability with our community older adult population. Which brings me to my next opportunity in my aging journey. I was accepted into a fellowship with the University of Minnesota, Project Reach, pairing rural advocates like me with researchers for the purpose of improving rural health outcomes. I was one of 3 accepted in the first cohort. Based on my experience setting up the Y Healthy Aging Network during the pandemic, I chose as my policy proposal digital inclusion and digital literacy for rural older adults, proposing a policy framework that the Minnesota State Library Service prioritize digital inclusion and digital literacy, championing our rural older adults in their 5-year plan, a plan that is required for their federal funding via the Library Services and Technology Act of 1996. The power of a University of Minnesota rural equity program validating me as an older adult and the project created through their advocacy. Our Minnesota State Library Services have accepted the policy proposal championing older adults. Our library is emerging, our libraries, 336 across all our communities, are emerging as the IT department for retirees. DEED is also reviewing the policy to inform the state's digital equity plan for inclusion and literacy for older adults. A proposal of this nature also informs the Department of Education commissioners. The library reports to the department, is part of that group under these commissioners, emphasizing the importance now of lifelong learning as a state goal, in addition to our traditional K through 12 approach. And then to get back to the saga of our here again, gone again fitness program in Hibbing, as we came out of the pandemic isolation of spring of 2021, our church site could no longer provide a rent-free space for us, demanding a very large rent from our struggling YMCA sponsor. An agreement was finally reached, and we restarted our program after an 18-month lapse. And yes, we did lose many of our over 85 people. Our Virginia Mesabi Y closed their doors a year later in bankruptcy. And we again had to find a new sponsor. The Duluth area YMCA has taken over our community program. We are 6 months into the relationship. We hope it is going well, but hope is not a plan. Which brings me to say it shouldn't be this hard to have sustainable community opportunities to age well. What am I learning from my journey? 5 things. Communities are at the center of aging well. Our aging language may need to be more engaging for growing aging population. Elders, elderly person, pensioner, beneficiary, retiree, oldster. We have to find some new words. Virtual is our new normal, exploring how virtual networks can benefit aging. 4, our aging policy and funding focus now is supports and services and healthcare access and delivery. Expanding our policy focus to include community healthy aging strategies moves us from a mindset of surviving aging to thriving in longevity. And most importantly, every aging person should have an opportunity to thrive in longevity, to achieve quality of life goals of purpose, maintaining our personal agency, social connectedness and belonging, purpose and activity. Quality of life outcomes should be our goals for all our aging programs.
Yes, quality of life is what we have also been very focused on. I couldn't agree more with you. And talk about where we currently are regarding aging in Minnesota, and talk about our demographics, our national ranking, and how does this impact jobs and taxes and government costs and such things?
As a community advocate for thriving in longevity, we are at a crossroads with our perceptions of aging versus our realities of aging. With 10,000 baby boomers retiring in the US daily from now until 2030, baby boomers most likely will change how we age. From 2030, when all baby boomers are retired, to 2050, Minnesota will have the largest older population in our history. Consider a recent John A. Hartford Foundation poll in 2021 that indicates that 71% of older adults say they are unwilling to live in a nursing home. However, studies indicate that as many as 65% of us will require some form of long-term supports and services during our lifetime. However, our focus on long-term care sustainability predominates so much of our aging conversations. Yes, very important, but we also have to consider our future, the need for increased federal Older Americans Act and state funding for predicted increases in the need for community supports and services. And most importantly, addressing our current void of policy and funding for community healthy aging strategies that can prevent or delay the need for long-term supports and services. We have to ask ourselves, how will the baby boomer determine the future, predicting them to seek preferences for policy, strategies, and funding to age well. So let's get into some of the demographics. The journey with Project REACH provided insights into the devastating and damaging narrative of aging in Minnesota. When reviewing our Project REACH policy proposals with a guest stakeholder as part of our curriculum, the stakeholder was a former legislator, asked how my project, Digital Inclusion and Literacy, would help people receive supports and services, as well as make it easier to access healthcare through telemedicine. And I thought, oh, there it is again. We are a population in need of supports and services. We are patients. What about older people as contributing community citizens? What about seeking our learnings and experience? Why is nobody asking me that about aging well? Therefore, the need for a fact sheet on aging, facts versus narrative, deriving the direction of aging policy and funding. So let's go through some of the statistics. Let's start at the national aging level. Nationally, our life expectancy is changing. Around 70 years in 1960, when our aging policy was developed, Social Security, Medicare, Older Americans Act, but now approaching 79 years in 2021. Are we in need for a new look at our national aging policy, strategies, and focus? Now looking at aging well in our communities too. There are more aging women than men in the US, 25% more at age 65 and almost 79% at 85 plus years, when more than half of women 85 years and older living alone. Aging is a lot about women. How might we address our national aging strategy for both ageism and sexism? And as the US population ages, older adults make up a larger portion of the population through 2050. How can our communities nurture the thinking that older people, are contributors versus a burden? Let's look at what Minnesota looks like. As of 2021, Minnesota is home to over 955,000 older adults, ages 65 years and older. From 2030 to 2050, the number of Minnesota older adults over the age of 85 will triple. Greater Minnesota, the geographic area outside the Twin Cities metro area, is home to a larger share of older adults. As of 2020, Minnesota has a larger 65 plus population than school-age children. But wait a minute, Minnesota towns in rural communities age faster, with more adults than school-age children years prior to 2020, with rural aging trends continuing into the future. Northeast Minnesota, where I live, crossed that line in 2017. And two, 70% of aging women 65 years and older live in greater Minnesota. Ageism plus sexism results in 2 times more older women living in poverty than men, with 33% of women relying exclusively on Social Security compared to about 17% for men. Therefore, can we say that aging in Minnesota may be more about rural and women living alone, often in poverty? Let's take a minute to look at our jobs, taxes, government cost. Minnesota's older adult population are contributors to society, yet we rarely hear the stats. ARP has compiled stats for people 50 years and older in Minnesota. They indicate that the state's 50 plus population is responsible for 57 cents of every dollar spent in Minnesota and expected to grow to 62 cents by 2050. The economic impact is 154 billion to the GDP. These are 2018 stats, by the way. We contribute 1.7 million jobs in the job market, supporting 111 billion in wages and salaries, and contributing 14 billion in state and local taxes. The US impact of the 50 plus population is the largest economy in the world GDP. In 2018, it was 8.3 trillion, expects to be 12.6 trillion in 2030 and 26.8 trillion in 2050.
Wow.
And you know, this tells us that we are contributors worth of investment, and we aren't always seen of that.
Now take a little closer look at where are seniors living and with whom?
You know, over 90% of Minnesota older adults live independently in our communities. I don't think we realize that. Of those 90%, 21% receive some supports and services through the Older Americans Act. It keeps them living in our communities, and it is the best dollar we spend. It costs us $55 million a year. And we think this is a lot of money, but it pales in comparison to what we spend for assisted living and long-term care. So we spend the smallest amount of money on our largest population. So let's look at the numbers for assisted living. Only 4.5% of our seniors live in settings, assisted living settings, with an estimated consumer cost of $1.9 billion per year, based on an average out-of-pocket per person cost of $45,000. Long-term care, that represents probably 3 to 4% of our population live in long-term care at a yearly Minnesota cost of $7.9 billion per year, with 69.5% of that as public cost and 30.5% at private cost, with an average yearly out-of-pocket cost per person of $141,000 per year. So, you know, these stats show that our conversation focuses on assisted living and long-term care viability, yet 90% of our population lives in our communities, and we don't have policy that supports that aging demographic. Do we have differences in genders, races, sexual preferences, and older demographics? I really don't know that. My research really didn't focus on that. I really focused on greater Minnesota, rural older adult population, understanding basic aging population data, rural urban differences, and the impact of ageism and the pandemic on achieving quality of life goals. Know too that my journey has validated the realities of aging in greater Minnesota, where we have more aging, have rural realities of distance, transportation challenges, financial constraints, poor housing, outdated built environments, diminished healthcare access, limited access to internet and connectivity, all are barriers to aging well in Minnesota. And yes, more study is needed to inform our aging agenda per the breadth of how we question aging. Aging, I'm finding through my research, is about rural and women living alone and often in poverty.
Yes, what you're talking about is exactly what we're seeing with elder voice advocates. And we have focused, and we began because of the horrible care being given in too many nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And we'll always keep that focus because we have a care crisis that's happening now. And a large part is the understaffing that has been a practice of the long-term care industry for decades, and now with the pandemic has been made even worse. But recognizing that home care is really probably our long-term solution for most of the people, and that's why with Elder Care IQ we've focused on home care as well. Let's talk about ageism in our society. What do you see? Where's our attitudes about age?
You know, I think ageism is our biggest challenge, our biggest hurdle. You know, as we've talked about, our policy was created in the 1960s when life expectancy was 70 years old. And with the idea that, you know, people retired at 65 and we need to sustain them till they died. And most people didn't live past 70. The idea that older adults are inherently unhealthy and uniformly incapable of economic production. And so our policy may also contribute to our narrative of older adults that is a population physically diminished and in needs of supports and services. And, you know, now as our life expectancy continues to rise, nearing 79 years now, our policy and narrative has to change, identifying older adults as integral systems, as consumers, as contributors, and therefore the need to include healthy aging in our policy and funding. You know, my personal aging journey informs me too that the employed population, you know, people generally under the age of 65, develop our aging policy, strategy, and funding for us on our behalf. You know, retiring should not mean that we are no longer stakeholders. Always a focus group and never a stakeholder. We are approached in the same manner as we approach the population of children. And you know what? That is not okay. Ageism will exist until older people get a seat at the table. And again, our aging language may contribute to the associations. You know, and it's also about a line we have drawn in the sand, age 65, retirement. We look forward to it. We are living longer, time to achieve our bucket lists, adventures, relocating to warmer climates for winter months, while keeping our home bases in Minnesota. Yet we find ourselves, no matter where we are, seeking new ways to find purpose and belonging in our new and present communities, always seeking opportunities to make new friends and friends of all ages. Our community narratives about aging often isolate us. A very good friend in her 90s patted my hand one day and said, you know, Ann, you have to make new friends your whole life because everyone you don't dies. how do our beliefs about our communities promote or prevent making new friends? The valuations from our fitness program indicate a big reason our older population joins us is to make new friends. The pandemic too should raise our awareness of ageism. Over 70% of COVID deaths nationally and over 90% in Minnesota are from our population of people 65 years and older. I noticed too that reporting the older adult death rate has not influenced citizen behavior around vaccinations. We're going to die anyway. What's the big deal? And I fear that the pandemic may go down in history as the culling of the herd.
That's sober. Wow. And I have to echo your sentiments about being the stakeholders. And that's what we experienced back in 2017 when we started to talk to the media about the horrible care that was being given in too many long-term care facilities. Governor Dayton appointed a task force that was only the elder stakeholders. None of the industry, which had never been done before, because the industry dictated our public policy prior to that. And of course, the stakeholders, the elders, their families weren't at the table. He changed that up. And then Commissioner Jan Malcolm continued that practice when we were working out the assisted living licensure legislation in 2019. She brought all the industry people, all of stakeholders, elder groups, and the state agencies, and we spent hundreds of hours. But we got a phenomenal bill passed, and that's because that opportunity was made. And I would advocate we just have to insist that we are brought to that table. Let's just look a little bit now, your projections for the future of aging. What do you see ahead of us?
It's interesting, and in studying this world, and I do study aging with all my projects, requires a ton of research, that gerontologists are studying aging in communities. In areas of research, policy, and practice. It aims to advance understanding of communities as fundamental context for aging and its diversity. And when I found this list, it was like, wow, it just validated all my learnings along the way. And so I would like to just share them. Communities as an overarching level of organization in which aging is embedded. So it's requiring strategies encouraging the participation of older citizens into the economic development strategy of their communities. So like zoning, building projects, business development. Secondly, an aging in community concept versus aging in place, because we tend to hear that aging in place, but that doesn't have the community concept to it. So a community concept of aging is a broader place-based community that is personally meaningful with older citizens, engaging through the networks of their neighborhoods, friends, together, the networks that make up a community. Third, where we live impacts how we age. Neighborhoods impact our physical activity, social and physical functioning, our social participation, volunteering, and ultimately our overall health status. So often we lead our aging strategies with health and support and services. So this is a strategy that leads communities as the nexus for aging. Another one of their key points that networks are important and can surface naturally within our community neighborhoods. And I like the idea of networks. Having our fitness program and Hibbing got to be more about a network that attracted our exercise with the doc program. We have speakers. Everybody wants that. We are going to be doing a focus group with an agency on aging this week on mental health for older adults. What are the needs? So having networks is a really important thing. And I think of a colleague, Phil Johnson, who put the Men's Shed network together down in the cities where older men volunteer time for community building projects. And Phil says, it's really the same quality of life goals that I'm promoting, that men want purpose and personal agency, activities, belonging. One of the other recommendations that we should know and continue to promote is ARP is considered a good actor in community gerontology, especially with their work with Age Friendly. Most interesting too is a new focusee on advocacy that policies and systems facilitate good aging communities. And that has to do with how they impact our design, resourcing, our housing, public works. And a recommendation that I can really hang my hat on, again, that what we talked about always tending to be a focus group and not a stakeholder. One of the key markers here is that older citizens as core stakeholders, finding ways to recruit and develop a stakeholder. And I know that my group of ladies in town have a learned helplessness. Like, what would I ever say on a community? We've nurtured the helplessness, so how do we find our voice again? And lastly, again, the diligence and savvy to conduct program evaluations as a way to inform policy development. Say bye-bye to evidence-based.
I've got one final question, Ann, and thank you. I really appreciate how direct you are. Just how is this impacting proper support now and in the future?
My preference would be to ask this question a bit differently. How are the projections for the future impacting our ability to thrive in longevity? We first have to understand that communities are the nexus for aging well. Secondly, our aging demographics necessitate the need for coordination of aging services across our Minnesota agencies and departments, finding a true north that unites us in policy, strategy, and funding to age well, ensuring that all age-related policies are inclusive of Minnesotans' race, ethnicity, culture, geography, sexual orientation, abilities, and other characteristics reflect the full population of our state. Our aging plan should address how older Minnesotans want to age in their communities, as well as lead and coordinate the assessment of infrastructure and community resource needs within every geographic region. Thinking too that the Minnesota Digital Equity Blueprint may have laid the foundation for some of this work. And a big thanks to my friend and colleague, Jane Leonard, for all the work she did in the equity plan. Most importantly, setting a goal of thriving in longevity requires that our aging outcomes move from support and services and healthcare goals to now also include community aging strategies with those same quality of life outcomes of purpose, personal agency, social engagement, connectedness, activity, and belonging as the long-term goals for all our strategies. These goals should be our true north for moving forward. And most importantly, achieving these quality of life goals moves us from the surviving aging to this thriving and longevity kind of thinking. And, I'd like to just finish by a gentle reminder to our elected leaders. Minnesota leads the older adult voter rate at 78%. Older adults in our state are more likely to vote than any other demographic group. Please know we want to age well. Governor Walz is promoting Minnesota as the best state for kids. How about Minnesota as the best state for aging too?
Amen to that. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing up legislators, because they have to be a part of the solution. They need to be listening to us and planning ahead. And for this reason, there's a bill that's going to be introduced this session by Senator Kelly Morrison and Representative Ginny Cleavorn, and it establishes a task force on aging. And for the first time, that would mandate planning ahead, planning for our aging demographic, and planning all the infrastructure changes that's going to imply. And some of this you mentioned, the jobs and the economy, etc. So I would urge people, talk to your legislators, let them know they need to pay attention to the issues that people who are aging have to deal with. There are solutions. We can do it together. So let's do it together. And please support that legislation. And thank you so much. I do so much appreciate all your work, and we'll continue our collaboration as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for asking me to be part of this.
Thank you.